In the middle of the night, a single father, pushing his mop down the quiet halls of a factory, walked past a crisis no one else could fix and solved it in less than a minute. His quick thinking saved the company from losing $100 million and left the CEO speechless. But his life didn't change the way you'd expect. Within days, powerful people tried to erase his name from the story. Lies started spreading. Even his own child's safety was suddenly at risk. Behind the scenes, someone was determined to destroy him no matter how many lives were ruined in the process. Why would they try to bury the truth, and how far will he go to protect it? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus Ellison guided his mop bucket down the quiet hallway of Brightworks Tools. At this hour 3:40 a.m., the massive factory was mostly silent, except for the distant hum of machinery and his soft footsteps on the polished concrete floor. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound, Marcus hummed quietly, the old hymn bringing comfort to the pre-dawn solitude. The melody reminded him of Sunday mornings with Lena, his 10-year-old daughter, sitting in their usual pew at First Baptist. His muscles ached from hours of mopping, but Marcus took pride in his work. Every clean floor meant a safer workplace for the people who kept this company running. He'd learned in the Army that no job was too small when it came to taking care of your people. The night shift was usually peaceful, giving Marcus time to think and pray while he worked. But tonight was different. As he approached the engineering lab, raised voices caught his attention. "We can't just guess at this." A man's voice, tense with frustration, carried through the partially open door. "If we're wrong about the torque variance, we're looking at $100 million recall." Marcus slowed his pace, not wanting to interrupt. Through the glass panel, he could see 3 engineers huddled around a whiteboard, their ties loosened and sleeves rolled up after what must have been a very long night. "The test results don't make sense," a woman argued, jabbing her marker at a diagram. "We've checked every component twice. The failures are random, there's no pattern." The third engineer ran his hands through his hair. "The board meeting's in 6 hours. If we don't have answers..." A phone rang, cutting through the tension. The first engineer checked his screen and swore under his breath, "It's the plant in Phoenix. We have to take this." They hurried out through the other door, leaving the lab empty. Marcus stood there for a moment, his mop forgotten. The whiteboard drew his eye a maze of technical drawings, equations, and hastily scrawled notes. In the Army, he'd worked on vehicle maintenance, developing a knack for spotting mechanical problems that others missed. Those skills had saved lives in the field. Setting his bucket aside, Marcus stepped into the lab. The board was a mess of information: torque specifications, temperature readings, component diagrams. But something about the layout tugged at his mind, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. He moved closer, studying the numbers. The engineers had drawn the assembly sequence for the torque wrench line, with test results marked at each stage. Marcus had cleaned this area hundreds of times, watching the machines work through their precise choreography. His eyes narrowed as he traced the flow chart. Therein the calibration sequence. The numbers shifted when the components heated up, but the baseline measurements were taken at room temperature, and that overseas part they'd added last month. Marcus's mind worked through the physics, remembering similar issues he'd solved in the field. Heat expansion would cause micro-slippage, unless... He was so absorbed in the problem that he didn't notice the footsteps approaching from behind. The scene painted itself exactly as requested, capturing Marcus's moment of discovery while maintaining the specified tone and accessibility. The narrative builds tension naturally through the overheard conversation, and Marcus's careful observation of the problem, ending precisely at the moment footsteps approach, as instructed. This opening sequence establishes Marcus's character through his work ethic, his background, and his analytical mind, while also setting up the central conflict that will drive the story forward. The language remains clear and accessible throughout, suitable for a 6th grade reading level, while maintaining emotional depth and technical credibility. Marcus stood before the whiteboard, his eyes tracing the complex network of diagrams and equations. Something wasn't right, could feel it in his bones, the same way he used to sense trouble on convoy runs. 20 years of mechanical work in the army had taught him to trust those instincts. The sound of heels clicking on concrete made him freeze. He was still holding the dry erase marker he'd picked up, caught in a moment of curiosity that suddenly felt like trespassing. "Can I help you?" The voice was firm but not unkind. Marcus turned to find Ruth Delgado in the doorway, her silver hair neatly styled despite the early hour. The CEO's presence was unexpected. She was known for starting her days early, but not this early. Her eyebrow arched as she noticed the marker in his hand. "Ma'am," Marcus said, straightening up, "I apologize. I was just looking at our $100 million problem?" Ruth stepped into the lab, her eyes moving between Marcus and the whiteboard. "You're Marcus Ellison, night shift maintenance, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." He set the marker down carefully. "I overheard the engineers talking about the torque issues. The diagram caught my eye." Ruth crossed her arms, but her expression held more curiosity than judgment. "And what exactly caught your eye, Mr. Ellison?" Marcus hesitated. He learned long ago that some people didn't want to hear solutions from unexpected sources, but something in Ruth's steady gaze encouraged him to continue. "It's in the calibration sequence," he said, pointing to a specific section of the diagram. "See these temperature readings? They're taking ambient measurements, but that's not accounting for the heat expansion when the line's running at full speed." Ruth stepped closer, her attention sharpening. "Go on." "There's micro slippage happening because of a mislabeled calibration assumption." Marcus picked up the marker again, this time with purpose. "May I?" Ruth nodded, moving beside him to watch. With 3 precise strokes, Marcus adjusted the diagram. "If you calibrate at operating temperature instead of ambient, and swap the sequence here," he drew a quick arrow, "then add a 0.5 millimeter shim to compensate for the expansion." His hand moved confidently across the board. "The torque should stabilize." Ruth studied the modifications, her expression thoughtful. She reached for the phone on the wall, punching in a number. "Tammy, can you come to the engineering lab? Bring a test unit." She hung up and turned back to Marcus. "We'll see if your theory holds up." Minutes later, Tammy Brooks hurried in, carrying a torque wrench from the production line. Her work boots squeaked on the freshly mopped floor as she looked between Ruth and Marcus with obvious curiosity. "Run it with these adjustments," Ruth instructed, gesturing to Marcus's corrections. Tammy's eyes widened slightly as she read the board, but she didn't hesitate. She made the calibration changes and began the test sequence. The machine whirred to life, its digital display blinking as it processed the new parameters. The room fell silent, except for the steady hum of the wrench. When the final readings appeared, Tammy let out a low whistle. "Output's perfect," she said, double-checking the numbers. "Dead center of spec, no variance." Ruth moved to the testing station, leaning against the counter as she stared at the readout. The results were unmistakable. The problem that had stumped their engineering team for days had just been solved in minutes. "How did you see that so fast?" she asked, turning to Marcus with undisguised amazement. Marcus shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the attention. The mop bucket still waited in the hallway, reminding him of his actual duties. "Sometimes you just know where to look," he said quietly. 20 years of fixing things in the army, you learn to spot patterns. The morning shift workers filed into Brightworks as the sun painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges. The usual tired shuffle of feet had been replaced by an energetic buzz of conversation. Small groups huddled near their workstations, voices low but excited. "Did you hear? The line's running again. Someone said the janitor fixed it. You believe that? I heard he took one look at the problem and solved it just like that." Marcus kept his head down as he worked, methodically cleaning the break room windows. The reflection of fluorescent lights made streaks visible on the glass, and he focused on making each stroke of his cloth count. Still, snippets of conversation drifted through the walls. Tammy Brooks walked past, giving him a small nod and a knowing smile. Word had spread fast after the successful test, and the night shift workers who'd witnessed it firsthand were now sharing the story with fresh enthusiasm. The morning sun streamed through the newly cleaned windows as Marcus gathered his cleaning supplies. His shift was almost over, but the familiar routine felt different today. Every surface seemed to hold whispered conversations about what had happened in the engineering lab. "Mr. Ellison?" He turned to find Ruth standing in the doorway of the break room. She'd changed into a fresh blazer, but her eyes showed the long hours she'd put in. "Ma'am," Marcus acknowledged, straightening up. "Would you join me in my office for a moment?" Marcus followed her down the corridor, past the wall of black and white photographs that documented Brightworks' history. Workers from different eras stared out from their frames faces that had seen the company through countless challenges. Ruth's office was warm and lived in, with well-worn leather chairs and a desk that had clearly seen decades of service. She gestured for Marcus to sit. "What you did this morning was remarkable," she said, settling into her chair. "You saved us more than just money, you saved jobs, people's livelihoods." Marcus shifted in his seat. "I just saw something that needed fixing, ma'am." "And fixed it you did." Ruth pulled out a folder. "I've spoken with HR. We'd like to offer you a raise, effective immediately. It's not much, but it's what we can do on short notice." She slid a paper across the desk. Marcus glanced at the number and shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, Miss Delgado, but I can't accept it. Not unless—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Unless what?" "Unless the line workers get their hazard bonuses too. They're the ones who've been dealing with the faulty units, risking injury. If there's money for a raise, it should go to them first." Ruth leaned back in her chair, studying him. The hint of a smile played at the corners of her mouth, but she quickly composed her features. "The hazard bonuses were tied up in bureaucracy," she said. "But you're right. They deserve recognition for their risk." She pulled the paper back. "I'll make sure both happen, their bonuses and your raise." "Thank you, ma'am, but just their bonuses will be fine." This time, Ruth didn't hide her smile. "You're a rare kind, Mr. Ellison. We'll process the bonuses today." She stood, extending her hand. "Thank you again. For everything." Marcus shook her hand and headed out, eager to get home. The morning shift was in full swing now, the production line humming with its usual rhythm but smoother, steadier than before. His old pickup truck sat alone in the far corner of the parking lot. The steering wheel was cool under his hands as he started the drive home, the familiar route taking him through streets just coming to life. Early morning joggers dodged newspaper carriers, and sprinklers ticked away on neat suburban lawns. The small house he shared with Lena sat back from the road, its white paint slightly faded but clean. The morning glories he'd planted along the fence were opening their purple faces to the sun. Inside, he found Lena at the kitchen table, still in her favorite rocket ship pajamas. She was concentrating on a bowl of cereal, a math workbook open beside her. "Morning, Daddy," she said, looking up. Her nose wrinkled. "You smell different today. Like the stuff you used to fix my bike chain." Marcus hung his jacket by the door and kissed the top of her head. "Had to help with some machines at work." "But you're the janitor," Lena said, tilting her head. "Don't other people fix the machines?" "Sometimes the person who cleans things notices what needs fixing." He opened the fridge, pulling out ingredients for breakfast. "How about some real food to go with that cereal? Can you make French toast?" "For my math whiz?" "Always." He started mixing eggs and cinnamon, watching as Lena returned to her workbook. She chewed her pencil, deep in thought over a problem. "Did you fix something important?" she asked suddenly, looking up again. Marcus measured vanilla into the egg mixture, considering how to answer. "I helped solve a problem, that's all." "Was it hard?" "Not really. Sometimes the answer is right there. You just have to look at things the right way." He dipped bread in the batter. "Like your math problems. Sometimes they seem tricky until you find the pattern." The bread sizzled as it hit the pan, filling the kitchen with warm, sweet smells. Lena watched him cook, her cereal forgotten. "I'm glad you fixed it," she said simply. "You always know how to fix things." Marcus flipped the French toast, thinking about the engineering lab, about Ruth's office, about the workers who would receive their bonuses. "Want to know a secret?" he asked. Lena nodded eagerly. "Sometimes the best way to fix something is to make sure everybody gets what they need, not just yourself." "Is that what you did today?" "Something like that." He slid the French toast onto a plate and drizzled it with maple syrup. "Now, let's see what you're working on in that math book." Lena scooted her chair closer to show him the problems, and Marcus settled in beside her, the smell of machine oil still clinging faintly to his clothes as morning light filled their small kitchen. Marcus lay on his worn but comfortable couch, an old quilt draped over him. The afternoon sun filtered through the living room curtains, casting warm patterns across the floor. His body settled into the familiar cushions, catching up on sleep after the eventful night shift. The quiet of his small home was broken only by the gentle hum of the window air conditioner. His phone buzzed once on the coffee table, then again and again. The persistent vibration pulled him from his light sleep. Marcus blinked, trying to orient himself in the drowsy afternoon light. The phone continued its insistent dance across the wooden surface. He reached for it, squinting at the screen. 23 missed calls. 47 text messages. His email inbox number had exploded into triple digits. "What in the world?" he muttered, sitting up and running a hand over his face. The first text was from Tommy. "Marcus, are you seeing this? You're all over the internet." Confusion creased his forehead as he opened his social media app. His normally quiet feed was flooded with notifications. There, at the top of his timeline, was a photo that made his stomach drop, the engineering lab whiteboard from last night, complete with his 3-stroke solution clearly visible in the marker strokes. The original post came from Kevin Chen, one of the junior engineers. "Night shift janitor solved our 100M crisis in seconds. Mind blown. Engineering. Innovation." The post had been shared thousands of times. News outlets had picked it up. Headlines screamed across his screen. "Janitor's brilliant solution saves company millions." "Hidden genius. The night shift hero." "Brightworks' unlikely savior. A janitor's engineering breakthrough." Marcus's hands felt cold despite the warm afternoon. His phone buzzed again, a local news station requesting an interview. Another buzz, a national morning show wanted him for tomorrow's broadcast. The notifications kept coming, each one making his heart beat a little faster. He got up and walked to the kitchen, his sock feet silent on the linoleum floor. There, held by a magnet on the refrigerator, was Lena's permission slip for next week's field trip. Her neat handwriting filled out the top portion. "Lena Ellison, grade 5, Mrs. Thompson's class." The paper seemed to mock him with its innocence. Just yesterday, his biggest concern had been making sure he remembered to sign it and include the $12 fee. Now, as his phone continued its relentless buzzing in the other room, he stared at his daughter's name. Lena was at school now, probably sitting in math class, unaware that her father had become an overnight internet sensation. She was already the only black girl in her grade, something she handled with remarkable grace for a 10-year-old. But this spotlight would make them both more visible than ever. Another wave of notifications chimed from the living room. Marcus walked back, picked up his phone, and navigated through the settings. His thumb hovered over the silence button for a moment before pressing it firmly. The sudden quiet felt both relieving and ominous. Back in the kitchen, he stood before the permission slip again. Lena's small world of homework, friendship bracelets, and field trips seemed suddenly fragile. He reached out and touched the paper, straightening it even though it didn't need straightening. His phone screen lit up silently on the coffee table. Even from here, he could see the preview of another message. "Mr. Ellison, this is Sharon Martinez from the Daily Tribune. We'd love to." The afternoon sun continued its path across his kitchen floor, the light shifting and changing while Marcus stood still, looking at his daughter's name on that simple piece of paper, wondering how many cameras would be waiting at school pickup time. The Brightworks conference room buzzed with nervous energy. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished table where the executive team had gathered for an emergency meeting. Evan Pierce, the COO, stood at the head of the table, his normally pristine appearance showing signs of strain, his tie slightly askew, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "We need to get ahead of this narrative," Evan said, clicking through a presentation of social media screenshots. "The story's spreading faster than we can track it. Major news outlets are already calling." Ruth Delgado sat quietly, her hands folded on the table, watching as Evan paced. Her weathered face remained calm, though her dark eyes tracked every movement in the room with careful attention. "I propose we frame this as a team effort," Evan continued, straightening his tie. "We acknowledge Marcus's contribution but emphasize the collaborative nature of our engineering process. It's safer, cleaner, and avoids any political complications." "Political complications?" Ruth's voice cut through the room like a steel blade wrapped in velvet. "Please explain what you mean by that, Evan." The COO shifted uncomfortably. "Well, there are certain optics to consider. A janitor solving a problem our engineering team couldn't crack, it could make the company look." He trailed off, searching for the right words. "Incompetent?" Ruth supplied. "Or perhaps you're more concerned that the janitor in question is black." The room fell silent. Several executives suddenly found their notepads fascinating. "Ruth, we have to think about shareholder confidence," Evan stammered. "The media will sensationalize this. They'll turn it into some sort of class warfare narrative. Or worse, they'll start digging into his background, his qualifications." "His qualifications?" Ruth stood slowly, her presence commanding attention despite her small stature. "I watched him solve in 3 minutes what our entire engineering department couldn't figure out in 3 weeks. Those are his qualifications." "But the board," Evan started. "The board didn't watch him fix that calibration issue with nothing but a marker and decades of hands-on experience," Ruth interrupted. "I did, and I won't pretend it was a team effort when it wasn't." Evan's face flushed red. "We're getting calls about his military service, his education, his family situation. The Twitter threads are already getting ugly. Some are claiming it's impossible, that we're making it up for publicity. Others are." He swallowed hard. "The comments are becoming racially charged. So your solution is to hide him?" Ruth's voice carried a sharp edge. "To minimize what he did because some people can't handle the truth of who he is? I'm trying to protect the company." Evan's voice rose. "And frankly, I'm trying to protect him too. Do you really want to throw him into this spotlight, the media circus? The scrutiny? He's got a young daughter to think about." Ruth walked to the window, looking out at the factory floor below where workers moved through their afternoon shifts. "When I started on that floor 45 years ago," she said quietly, "there were people who thought a Latina woman had no business running a machine, let alone running the company. If everyone who came before us had chosen safety over truth, where would any of us be?" She turned back to the room. "Marcus Ellison solved our crisis. He did it with dignity, humility, and extraordinary skill. We will acknowledge that truth, fully and publicly. We will support him and his daughter through whatever comes next. And we will show every person who works in this building that excellence matters more than titles." Evan slumped in his chair. "The board won't like this." "The board doesn't have to like it," Ruth replied. "They just have to live with it." The meeting dispersed, executives filing out with uncertain glances between them. Ruth remained by the window, watching the sunset paint the factory in shades of gold. In his small kitchen, Marcus stirred a pot of boiling pasta, the familiar motions of cooking helping to calm his churning thoughts. The day's chaos felt distant here, with the comfortable sounds of home around him. Lena's pencil scratching against paper as she did homework at the kitchen table, the gentle bubbling of the sauce, the low hum of the refrigerator. "Dad, how do you spell precipitation?" Lena asked, looking up from her science worksheet. Marcus spelled it out carefully, adding a pinch of salt to the pasta water. Almost done with that homework, sunshine? 2 more questions, she replied, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated. Are we having your special sauce? You know it, Marcus smiled, stirring the rich tomato sauce that had been simmering for hours. It was his mother's recipe, one of the few things that always made difficult days better. The phone rang, cutting through their peaceful moment. Marcus checked the caller ID, surprised to see Ruth Delgado's name on the screen. Hello, he answered, turning down the heat under the pasta. Marcus, Ruth's voice was warm, but serious. I apologize for calling so late. I need you to come in tomorrow morning. Can you meet me at 8? Marcus glanced at Lena, then at the calendar on the fridge with her school schedule. I can drop Lena at school at 7:30 and be there by 8. Perfect, Ruth said. And Marcus, try not to worry about all this media attention. We'll figure it out together. The call ended, and Marcus returned to the stove, lifting the pasta pot to drain it. Lena watched him with curious eyes. Was that your boss? She asked. That was Ms. Delgado, yes, Marcus nodded, combining the pasta with his sauce. She wants to talk to me tomorrow morning. About how you fixed the machines. Something like that, Marcus said, placing a steaming plate in front of her. Now, let's enjoy this dinner. Tell me about what you learned in science today. As Lena launched into an explanation about the water cycle, Marcus listened, grateful for this moment of normalcy. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, there was pasta, there was his daughter's voice, and there was peace in their small kitchen as the evening settled around them. Marcus stepped into Brightworks' main boardroom, his work boots silent against the thick carpet. The room smelled of leather and wood polish, so different from the industrial cleaners and machine oil he was used to. Afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting warm rectangles across the massive mahogany table that dominated the space. He tugged self-consciously at the collar of his freshly pressed shirt, the best one he owned, bought 3 years ago for a church function. Around the table sat 8 board members in tailored suits, their expressions a mix of curiosity and carefully masked skepticism. Ruth Delgado stood at the head of the table, her silver hair catching the sunlight. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ellison, she said warmly, gesturing to an empty chair. Please, have a seat. Marcus nodded, lowering himself into the leather chair. His notebook, worn and filled with years of observations and calculations, sat before him like a shield. Cynthia Harrow, elegant in a pearl necklace and navy blazer, leaned forward with a practiced smile. Mr. Ellison, we're all quite intrigued by your contribution to solving our recent technical challenge. Her voice was honey smooth, but Marcus caught the slight pause, the careful choice of words. 20 years in the army had taught him to read between lines. Yes, ma'am, he replied simply, keeping his voice steady and professional. I noticed a pattern in the calibration sequence that needed adjustment. Fascinating, Cynthia said, examining a document before her. And you developed this solution entirely on your own? Without any consultation with our engineering team? The question hung in the air. Marcus could feel the weight of every eye in the room. I observed the problem while cleaning the lab, he explained. The solution came from understanding how heat affects metal expansion, something I learned maintaining vehicles in combat zones. Another board member cleared his throat. But surely our engineers had considered heat expansion factors? They did, Marcus acknowledged. But they were calibrating at ambient temperature, not accounting for the operational heat variance of the new overseas components. Mr. Ellison, Cynthia interjected, her smile never wavering. While we appreciate initiative, you must understand our position. We're responsible for shareholder value, quality control, liability. She spread her manicured hands. We need to ensure proper protocols were followed. Ruth's chair creaked as she shifted. The solution has already been validated on the production line, Cynthia. The numbers speak for themselves. Numbers can be coincidental, Cynthia replied smoothly. We need to be absolutely certain before making any public statements about who solved what. There could be intellectual property concerns, liability issues. Marcus felt his chest tighten, but kept his expression neutral. He'd faced worse pressure than this. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns. I'm not looking for credit or attention. I just saw a problem I could fix, so I fixed it." "How admirable," Cynthia said, her tone suggesting anything but admiration. "Still, we need to follow proper channels. Perhaps if we had documentation of your previous experience with similar systems." "I believe that's enough questioning for now," Ruth interrupted, her voice firm. "The fact remains that Mr. Ellison's solution worked. What we need to discuss is how to move forward." The board members exchanged glances. Marcus sat quietly, his hands folded on top of his notebook, remembering his daughter's words that morning. "Be brave, Dad. Like you always tell me. I propose a 30-day internal validation period," Ruth continued. "During this time, we'll thoroughly document the solution's effectiveness while maintaining appropriate discretion about its origins." Cynthia nodded, seemingly satisfied. "That seems prudent. We can revisit the matter of public acknowledgement once we have proper documentation and verification." The meeting concluded with polite nods and murmured agreements. Marcus stood, careful not to let his chair scrape against the floor, and made his way to the door. His mind was already drifting to his evening shift, to Lena's homework, to the ordinary rhythm of their lives that now felt threatened by extraordinary circumstances. Ruth caught up with him in the hallway outside the boardroom. The clicking of her sensible heels echoed against the walls as she approached. "Marcus, wait a moment," she called softly. He turned, meeting her concerned gaze. "I have a proposal for you," she said, pulling a folder from her portfolio. "A 30-day special advisor contract. You'd help stabilize the line, train the crews on your calibration method. No fancy title, just the chance to make sure this fix sticks." Marcus studied the folder but didn't take it. "Ms. Delgado, I appreciate the offer, but..." He thought of Lena, of the reporters already calling, of the weight of visibility. "I know it's not ideal," Ruth said gently, "but the plant needs this. The workers need this. And if we don't document your process properly, someone else might claim it later." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the decision. His daughter's future, the workers' jobs, his own peace of mind, all hanging in the balance. Finally, he nodded, accepting the folder. 30 days, he said quietly. The supply closet felt like an old friend to Marcus. The familiar scent of pine cleaner and paper products wrapped around him like a comfortable blanket. A single bulb cast soft shadows on metal shelves, lined with cleaning supplies and paper towels. This small space had been his sanctuary during many night shifts, a quiet place to think and pray. Marcus sat on an overturned bucket, his worn Bible open in his lap. The contract from Ruth lay beside him on a stack of boxes, its crisp white pages a stark contrast to the industrial setting. The mechanical hum of the factory filtered through the door, a steady rhythm he'd grown to know as well as his own heartbeat. "Lord," he whispered, running his finger along the familiar verses of Proverbs, "I could use some wisdom right about now." His Bible naturally fell open to a passage he'd read countless times during difficult moments. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." The words brought a small smile to his face as he remembered reading them to Lena after Sarah passed. His daughter had been so young then, trying to understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. Now here he was, facing another crossroads that would affect them both. Marcus pulled out the lunch note Lena had slipped into his bag this morning. Her careful third-grade handwriting spelled out, "You're the best dad ever," complete with a crayon drawing of what looked like a superhero holding a mop. The sight made his heart squeeze. The contract terms echoed in his mind. 30 days as special advisor. No formal title, but a significant temporary pay increase. The chance to implement his fix properly, train the crews, make sure everything ran smoothly. Ruth had been straightforward about the challenges. Some people wouldn't like it, wouldn't accept him in this role. He thought about the faces on the production line. Tammy and her crew, the maintenance team, even the engineers who'd first dismissed him. Good people who deserved job security. If his solution could help save their livelihoods, didn't he owe it to them to try? Marcus pulled his pocket notebook from his shirt pocket, flipping through pages of calculations and observations gathered over countless nights. Between the technical notes were scattered prayers and Bible verses, his way of keeping faith and facts intertwined. Near the back, he'd started a new page, reasons to accept and reasons to decline. Under accept, under decline. The list stared back at him, black ink stark against white paper. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering something Pastor J.B. had told him last Sunday. Sometimes God opens doors we never expected. The question isn't whether we're worthy to walk through them. It's whether we're willing to trust Him on the other side. Marcus reached for his pen, the metal warm from being carried close to his heart. The contract sat patient and still, waiting for his decision. With deliberate care, he uncapped the pen and began to sign his name. His signature looked strange in the formal space provided. The same hand that pushed mops and fixed machinery now committing to something entirely new. Each letter felt weightier than usual, like he was signing more than just his name. He was signing up for a challenge that would test everything he believed about himself and others. The ink dried quickly in the supply closet's dry air. Marcus carefully folded the contract and slipped it into his lunch bag, right next to Lena's note. The juxtaposition felt right somehow. His commitment to the future nestled against his daughter's love and trust. Standing up, Marcus straightened his uniform and tucked his Bible back into his pocket. He patted the lunch bag, feeling the edge of the contract through the brown paper. Whatever came next, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. He had his faith, his daughter's love, and years of quiet wisdom earned in these very halls. The supply closet light clicked off with a familiar snap, and Marcus stepped back into the corridor, ready to begin the next chapter of his life. The morning sun streamed through the factory's high windows, casting long shadows across the production floor. Marcus wheeled his cart down the main aisle, its wheels squeaking slightly against the concrete. He'd traded his usual mop and bucket for a collection of tools, binders, and balanced carefully on top 2 boxes of fresh donuts from Jerry's Bakery. Workers glanced up from their stations, some offering tentative waves, while others whispered behind their hands. The viral story had spread through the plant like wildfire, and Marcus could feel their curious stares following him. "Morning, everyone," he called out, his voice warm and steady. He parked his cart near the first workstation where 3 operators huddled over a torque wrench. "Thought we might start the day with something sweet." Tammy Brooks, the line lead, stepped forward first. "Donuts for breakfast? You trying to bribe us already?" Her smile took any sting from the words. Marcus chuckled, opening the first box. "Consider it a peace offering. Figure we could all use a sugar boost while we work through these new procedures." The ice broken, workers drifted over one by one. Marcus learned their names, listened to their stories about the line, and most importantly, their frustrations with the current system. He jotted notes in his pocket notebook, the same one he'd used during his night shifts. "See this manual?" He pulled out a thick binder stuffed with technical jargon. "By the end of the week, we're going to have something everyone can actually understand." Tammy peered over his shoulder as he started sketching a simpler diagram. "You're really not going to use that fancy corner office they offered you?" "Don't need it." Marcus patted his rolling cart. "Got everything I need right here. Besides, can't hear the real story of what's happening from up there." Throughout the morning, Marcus moved from station to station. He didn't just explain the new calibration process, he listened. When Joe from Station 4 mentioned the lighting made it hard to read the measurements, Marcus added better LED strips to his list. When Maria pointed out that the Spanish translation of the safety protocols was outdated, he started a separate notebook just for language updates. During their coffee break, Tammy found Marcus at his cart, rewriting instructions in clear, simple steps. "You know," she said, settling onto a nearby stool, "most consultants come in telling us what we're doing wrong. You're the first one who's actually asked us what we think. Marcus looked up from his work. Best solutions usually come from the people doing the job every day. I learned that in the armor sergeants know more about what's really happening than any general. The day moved quickly. Marcus created laminated cards with step-by-step photos, making sure each station had both English and Spanish versions. He worked alongside the operators, getting his hands dirty when needed, showing them the subtle signs of misalignment he'd noticed that first night. By late afternoon, the tension had mostly melted away. Workers called him over by name instead of Sir or Mr. Ellison. He heard laughter mixing with the mechanical sounds of the factory floor. Even the engineers, initially skeptical, started bringing their questions directly to his cart. When Ruth stopped by to check on his progress, she found him cross-legged on the floor with a group of workers, demonstrating the proper way to check for heat expansion using a simple temperature strip he'd designed. "Looks like you're settling in," she observed, taking in the organized chaos of his mobile office. Marcus stood, brushing off his pants. "Yes, ma'am. Think we're making good progress. I've got some ideas for improving the training materials, if you'd like to see them." Ruth smiled at his carefully organized cart. "I see you didn't take the office upstairs. If it's all the same to you, I'd rather stay close to the action. Easier to spot problems before they become problems." As the day shift wound down, Marcus packed up his cart, making sure everything was ready for tomorrow. His notebook had pages of new notes, suggestions, and sketches. More importantly, he had names, faces, and stories to go with every station on the line. The evening sun painted the sky orange as Marcus sat with Lena on their small front porch. She curled up next to him on the worn wooden swing, her homework spread across her lap. "Dad?" she asked, looking up from her math problems. "Tommy at school said you're famous now. He saw you on his mom's phone." Marcus wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Not famous, baby. Just helping out more at work for a while. Remember how I used to fix your bike when the chain got stuck?" Lena nodded. "Well, it's kind of like that, but with bigger machines. The people at work needed some help fixing things, and I knew how to do it. But you're still going to be there at night to tuck me in, right?" Marcus hugged her closer. "Most nights, yes. And when I can't be, Mrs. Johnson next door will check on you, but I'll always be home for breakfast and to help with homework. Promise?" "Promise." He kissed the top of her head. "Now, how about we tackle that math homework together?" As they worked through fractions and decimals, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The day had gone better than he'd hoped. He'd managed to start building trust with the workers while staying true to himself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, this moment with Lena was all that mattered. He glanced at his work notebook peeking out of his bag, filled with ideas for making the plant run smoother. But his most important job sat right beside him, concentration furrowed on her forehead as she worked out a particularly tricky problem. The middle. The morning sun streamed through the factory's high windows, casting long shadows across the production floor. Marcus wheeled his cart down the main aisle, its wheels squeaking slightly against the concrete. He traded his usual mop and bucket for a collection of tools, binders, and balanced carefully on top 2 boxes of fresh donuts from Jerry's bakery. Workers glanced up from their stations, some offering tentative waves, while others whispered behind their hands. The viral story had spread through the plant like wildfire, and Marcus could feel their curious stares following him. "Morning, everyone," he called out, his voice warm and steady. He parked his cart near the first workstation where 3 operators huddled over a torque wrench. "Thought we might start the day with something sweet." Tammy Brooks, the line lead, stepped forward first. "Donuts for breakfast? You trying to bribe us already?" Her smile took any sting from the words. Marcus chuckled, opening the first box. "Consider it a peace offering. Figure we could all use a sugar boost while we work through these new procedures." The ice broken, workers drifted over one by one. Marcus learned their names as they picked through the assortment. Mike preferred plain glazed. Sarah went straight for the chocolate, and Joey couldn't decide between maple and Boston cream. "How's Tommy doing in Little League?" Marcus asked Mike, remembering the photo on his workstation. Still pitching? Mike's face lit up. You noticed that? Yeah, he made the all-star team last week. My Lena's about his age, Marcus said, pulling out his notebook to jot down Tommy's name and achievement. Maybe they'll end up in the same middle school next year. As the morning progressed, Marcus's rolling cart became his mobile command center. He'd wheel it from station to station, keeping his tools organized in clear plastic bins. The bottom shelf held his reference materials manuals, calibration guides, and the plain English instructions he was developing. A small whiteboard clipped to the side became his message center. Near the hydraulic press, he spent 20 minutes just listening to Elena describe a recurring calibration issue. His notebook came out again, filling with observations and ideas. So it catches most on humid days? He asked, drawing a simple diagram. Tell me more about that. By mid-morning, the cart had acquired a few personal touches: a photo of Lena taped to one corner, a small American flag from Bill's desk, a fellow veteran who'd served in Desert Storm, and a cardboard sign someone had made that read, Marcus's mobile office in playful letters. During the lunch break, workers who usually ate at separate tables began gravitating toward Marcus's spot in the break room. Jenny from Quality Control brought over her homemade cookies to share, and the conversation flowed easily from work concerns to family stories. My oldest just started college, Dave mentioned between bites. Engineering, if you can believe it. That's something to be proud of, Marcus said, making another note. Where's she studying? State. Dave beamed. Full scholarship. Marcus noticed Robert hanging back by the coffee machine, still unsure about joining the group. Hey Robert, he called out. Didn't you mention yesterday about trouble with the number 3 calibrator? Want to walk me through it after lunch? Robert nodded, surprised and pleased to be remembered. Yeah, that'd be great, actually. The afternoon passed in a blur of conversations and connections. Marcus kept his notebook handy, but found himself writing down more personal details than technical notes: birthdays, kids' names, upcoming anniversaries. Every fact was a thread in the fabric of trust he was carefully weaving. When the day wound down, Marcus rolled his cart to a quiet corner of the break room. He pulled out his worn notebook, flipping past pages of technical drawings and personal notes to a blank space. In careful letters, he wrote a simple prayer. Lord, keep me useful, not important. Marcus stood near the assembly line, explaining a calibration sequence to 2 operators. His rolling cart was parked beside him, its surface covered with diagrams and a half-empty box of donuts. The morning light filtered through the factory's high windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. So, if you check the temperature reading first, he said, pointing to a gauge, you'll catch any variance before. Ah, there's our custodial consultant. The words floated across the production floor, followed by a small chorus of chuckles. Marcus turned to see Bradley Thompson, one of the mid-level managers, approaching with 2 visiting supervisors from the company's Dallas plant. Bradley wore a crisp polo shirt with the Brightworks logo, his silver-rimmed glasses catching the fluorescent light. The operators beside Marcus stiffened. Tammy, working nearby, shot Bradley a sharp look. Good morning, Mr. Thompson, Marcus said calmly, straightening up from the diagram. He noticed how Bradley's guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between him and their host. Just showing our Dallas friends how we solved that torque wrench crisis, Bradley continued, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Our custodial consultant here had quite the insight. Marcus took a slow breath, remembering Lena's words from breakfast. Dad, you always say, it's not what happens to you, but how you handle it that matters. Actually, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the floor, I prefer Marcus, or Mr. Ellison, if we're being formal. He smiled, warm but firm. Though I appreciate the alliteration of custodial consultant, it doesn't quite capture what we're doing here together. The production floor had gone quiet. Even the machines seemed to hum more softly. Bradley's smile faltered. Oh, I didn't mean. No offense taken, Marcus cut in smoothly. He gestured to his diagrams. Would you like to see what we've been working on? The team here has some impressive improvements to share. One of the Dallas supervisors, a woman with salt and pepper hair, stepped forward. We'd love to hear about it, Mr. Ellison. Marcus walked them through the new calibration process, giving credit to the operators who had helped refine it. He pointed out how Sarah had suggested color-coding the temperature zones for quick reference, and how Mike's experience with the older models had helped identify potential friction points. Bradley stood back, his earlier bravado deflated. The Dallas supervisors asked thoughtful questions, scribbling notes and nodding with genuine interest. When they finished, the female supervisor extended her hand to Marcus. This is excellent work. Dallas could learn a lot from your approach. It's all about listening to the people who know these machines best, Marcus replied, shaking her hand. Would you like a donut for the road? We've still got a few left. After they left, Tammy approached Marcus's cart. That was something else, she said quietly. The way you handled Bradley. Marcus adjusted some papers on his cart, keeping his hands busy. Sometimes people test you to see if you'll sink to their level. Best response is to build them a bridge instead. The afternoon shift arrived, and Marcus continued his rounds. He helped troubleshoot a sticky valve, updated the training manual, and listened to concerns about the new safety protocols. If he noticed Bradley avoiding his section of the floor, he didn't mention it. As the day wound down, Marcus wheeled his cart to the supply closet where he still kept his cleaning supplies. The familiar smell of lemon cleaner and fresh mop heads welcomed him. He pulled out his pocket notebook, worn smooth from years of use, and found a clean page. Under the date, he wrote, "Incident with BT, custodial consultant comment." Below that he added, "Lesson, choose dignity over ego." He paused, then continued, "Remember, corrections can lift people up instead of putting them down. Everyone deserves a chance to do better." The notebook pages held years of similar entries, observations, prayers, and lessons learned. Some pages contained technical drawings, others held Bible verses or quotes that spoke to him. On the facing page, he could see Lena's latest note. "Dad, you're my hero, even when you're just Dad." Marcus closed the notebook and tucked it into his shirt pocket, right over his heart where he always kept it. Through the supply closet window, he could see the factory floor settling into its evening rhythm, workers changing shifts under the steady glow of fluorescent lights. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the factory windows as Marcus finished helping Jim Cooper adjust a calibration setting. Jim, a stocky man in his 50s with weathered hands and tired eyes, lingered by the machine even after they'd finished. "Everything okay, Jim?" Marcus asked, noticing the man's unusual hesitation. Jim twisted his wedding ring, a nervous habit Marcus had observed over the past weeks. "Sarah's got her big scan tomorrow," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the hum of machinery. "The doctors. They're worried about something they saw last time." Marcus set down his clipboard, giving Jim his full attention. The two men stood in the relative privacy created by the large manufacturing equipment around them. "I don't usually ask this kind of thing," Jim continued, his eyes fixed on the floor. "But I've seen you with that little Bible in your pocket, and well, would you maybe say a prayer for Sarah?" Marcus's expression softened. "Of course, Jim." "Right now?" Jim nodded, glancing around self-consciously. Marcus stepped closer, keeping his voice low and gentle. "Lord, we lift up Sarah to you. Guide the doctor's hands and eyes tomorrow. Bring peace to her and Jim's hearts. Amen." The simple prayer lasted less than 30 seconds, but Jim's shoulders visibly relaxed. "Thanks, Marcus. That means a lot." Word spread quietly through the plant. The next morning, Teresa from packaging caught Marcus by his cart. Her grandson was having surgery. Would he mind? By the end of the week, it had become an unspoken understanding. Before the morning shift began, a small group would gather near Marcus's cart. Some came to pray, others just to stand in supportive silence. 3 minutes, Marcus would say, checking his watch. Nobody has to stay. This is just for those who want it. He kept the prayers simple and inclusive. Lord, watch over this crew today. Keep our hands steady and our minds clear. Protect those we love. Amen. Tommy started calling them toolbox prayers, and the name stuck. Workers would slip Marcus prayer requests on small notes throughout the day. A daughter's job interview, a son's deployment, a parent's health scare. He kept them all in his pocket notebook, right next to his calibration calculations. The group grew organically. Marcus never pushed anyone to join, but he made sure everyone knew they were welcome. Even those who didn't participate would often pause their work, listening from a respectful distance. One Tuesday morning, nearly 3 weeks into his advisory role, Marcus noticed more faces than usual gathering near his cart. Dave from maintenance had brought his whole crew. The night shift workers were lingering past their usual clock-out time. "My wife," Jim announced to the group, his voice thick with emotion. The scan came back clear. A quiet murmur of relief rippled through the gathered workers. Marcus smiled, placing a gentle hand on Jim's shoulder. "Thank you, Lord, for this good news," he began. "We're grateful for the doctors, for the healing, for hope." From the elevated walkway near the management offices, Ruth Delgado paused her morning rounds. She watched the scene below. 30 or more workers gathered in a loose circle around Marcus's cart. Some had heads bowed, others simply stood close together, coffee cups in hand. The prayer itself was barely audible where she stood, but she could feel its impact in the way the group moved closer together, in the supportive hands on shoulders, in the quiet nods of understanding. Here was something authentic, something that transcended job titles and company politics. Marcus concluded the prayer with a simple "Amen," and the group began to disperse. Workers moved to their stations with renewed purpose, exchanging small smiles and words of encouragement. The whole gathering had taken less than 3 minutes, but its effect lingered in the air like a gentle echo. Ruth noticed how Marcus spoke briefly with Jim, their conversation punctuated by what looked like thank yous. How he helped Teresa adjust her safety glasses with grandfatherly care. How even Bradley Thompson, who had been watching from the periphery, gave Marcus a respectful nod before heading to his office. Something caught in Ruth's throat as she watched Marcus return to his work, tucking his small notebook back into his pocket. She'd seen many attempts at team building over her decades in manufacturing, trust falls and motivational speakers in corporate retreats, but this was different. This was real. The factory floor hummed with its usual morning activity, but there was a tangible shift in the atmosphere. Workers moved with more purpose, spoke with more kindness, carried themselves with more dignity. Ruth remained on the walkway, unexpectedly moved by what she'd witnessed. Not just a prayer circle, but a community coming together, finding strength in each other's faith and friendship. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp as Marcus and Lena walked hand in hand toward the Brightworks plant. The massive brick building looked different in the weekend quiet, with most of the machines silent and only a skeleton crew maintaining essential operations. Lena skipped beside her father, her bright yellow sweater a spot of sunshine against the industrial backdrop. "Will I get to see where you fix things, Dad?" Marcus smiled down at her. "Sure will, baby girl. And Ms. Ruth herself is going to show us around." "The boss lady?" Lena's eyes widened. "Is she nice?" "Very nice," Marcus assured her. "And smart, too. She knows this place better than anyone." They found Ruth waiting at the main entrance, dressed casually in slacks and a blue cardigan instead of her usual business attire. Her silver hair caught the morning light, and her warm smile made Lena relax instantly. "You must be Lena," Ruth said, bending slightly to meet the girl's eyes. "I've heard wonderful things about you from your father." Lena studied Ruth with that direct, unfiltered gaze that children often have. "Dad says you're the one who gave him a chance to help fix things." Ruth's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Actually, your father gave us a chance. We're lucky to have him here." The tour began in the main production area, where Ruth explained the basics of what they made. Lena asked thoughtful questions about each machine, showing the same analytical mind her father possessed. When they reached the engineering lab where Marcus had first solved the calibration problem, Lena immediately went to the whiteboard. "Is this where Dad drew his special diagram?" she asked, running her fingers along the edge of the board. "It sure is," Ruth answered. "That night changed a lot of things for us." As they walked through the administrative wing, Lena suddenly stopped, transfixed by something on the wall. It was a massive collection of black and white photographs, hundreds of faces spanning decades of Brightworks history. "Who are all these people?" Lena asked, moving closer to examine the photos. Ruth stepped beside her. "These are the people who built this company. Every single one of them mattered." She pointed to a faded photograph from the 1970s. "See that young woman there? That's me, back when I worked as a packer on the assembly line." Lena's head snapped around. "You weren't always the boss?" Ruth laughed softly. "No, honey. I started right there on the floor, packing tools into boxes, worked every job you can think of before I got this far." Marcus watched his daughter process this information, seeing the wheels turning in her mind. Lena moved along the wall slowly, studying each face with careful attention. She stopped at a recent photo, showing workers from the current production line. "There's Miss Tammy," she exclaimed, pointing to a familiar face. "And Mr. Jim from Dad's prayers?" Ruth nodded. "Every face on this wall has a story, Lena. Every person made a difference, whether they ran machines, swept floors, or solved problems like your dad." They continued the tour, but Lena kept glancing back at the wall of photos. During their lunch break in Ruth's office, while the adults discussed some production details, Lena pulled a small notepad and pencil from her pocket, a habit she'd picked up from her father. Marcus noticed her scribbling intently but didn't peek. He knew that look of concentration on her face. It meant she was working something out in her own way. After lunch, as they prepared to leave, Lena asked to use the restroom. On her way back, she paused by Marcus's rolling cart, his mobile workplace, and slipped something into the pocket of his jacket hanging there. The tour concluded with Ruth showing them the shipping area, where finished products began their journey to customers around the country. As they said their goodbyes, Lena surprised Ruth with a quick hug. "Thank you for showing me where Dad works," she said. "I like that you keep all the pictures. It's like everybody matters." Ruth's eyes misted slightly. "That's exactly right, Lena. Everybody matters." On the drive home, Lena was unusually quiet, lost in thought. Marcus knew better than to push. His daughter would share what was on her mind when she was ready. That evening, after Lena had gone to bed, Marcus settled into his favorite chair to review some training materials for Monday. Reaching for his jacket, he felt something in the pocket. He pulled out a carefully folded note, written in Lena's neat schoolgirl handwriting. "Be brave. I like brave. L." Marcus held the note for a long moment, then opened his worn notebook. He pressed the paper flat between the pages, smoothing it carefully with his weathered hands. His daughter's words joined his prayers, his diagrams, and his daily observations. Another piece of wisdom to carry close to his heart. Marcus stood in the conference room, his heart beating steadily against his crisp white shirt. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished oak table where the board members sat in press suits and pearls. His rolling cart, now familiar as an old friend, waited quietly in the corner. Ruth sat at the head of the table, her presence reassuring. She nodded slightly, giving him the signal to begin. The room fell silent as Marcus cleared his throat. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and clear. "Today I'll show you the changes we've made to the torque wrench calibration process." Cynthia Harrow adjusted her glasses, her expression carefully neutral. Other board members leaned forward, some with notepads ready, others with arms crossed. Marcus could feel their scrutiny, but he focused on the facts, just as he had done in the Army. "First, let me show you our baseline data." Marcus rolled out a simple chart showing error rates from the past 5 years. The numbers told a clear story, one of consistent problems that had plagued the line. He moved with quiet confidence, demonstrating each step of the new process. His hands, strong and sure, showed how the calibration sequence had been reordered. He explained in plain language that even Cynthia couldn't dismiss. The key was recognizing that heat expansion affects the metal differently at working temperature. Marcus explained, pointing to a diagram. We now calibrate at operating temperature, not room temperature. Tommy, who had been invited to help with the demonstration, stepped forward with a batch of test units. These were calibrated using the new process, she said, her voice steady with pride. The board members watched intently as Marcus and Tammy ran the units through a series of stress tests. Numbers flashed on the digital display, each one better than the last. Even the most skeptical board members began nodding in appreciation. When the final results appeared on the screen, a murmur rippled through the room. The error rate had dropped to 0.02%, far below the plant's previous best of 0.5%. This isn't just a temporary fix, Marcus explained. We've documented everything in clear steps that any worker can follow. The process is now part of our standard operating procedures. The silence that followed felt heavy with possibility. Then, from the far end of the table, slow applause began. It spread quickly, building into a wave that filled the room. Even Cynthia joined in, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Ruth stood up, waiting for the applause to fade. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," she said, her voice carrying authority earned over decades. "What we've seen today isn't just about numbers. It's about vision, leadership, and the kind of innovation that built this company." She turned to face Marcus directly. "Mr. Ellison, over the past month, you've shown us something remarkable, not just in solving technical problems, but in bringing people together, in teaching with patience, and in leading with humility." Marcus stood very still, aware that something important was about to happen. "I'd like to offer you the position of Director of Process Integrity," Ruth continued. "This would be a permanent role, with full benefits and a seat on our operations committee. We need your expertise, your leadership, and yes, your heart for this work." The room erupted again, this time with even louder applause. Tommy beamed from her spot near the door. Several board members stood up, reaching to shake Marcus's hand. Marcus paused, overwhelmed by the moment. "Thank you, Miss Delgado. I'd be honored." Ruth smiled, the kind of smile that carried decades of her own journey from the factory floor to the CEO's office. "The honor is ours, Marcus." As the board members filed out, still talking excitedly about the demonstration, Marcus felt a sudden need to share the news. He stepped out into the hallway, phone already in hand. The corridor was quiet except for his footsteps as he walked to the window. Outside, the autumn sun painted the factory grounds in golden light. As he dialed Lena's number, the town's old church bells began to ring, their deep tones floating across the morning air. His hands trembled slightly as he held the phone, not from fear anymore, but from the pure joy of knowing he could tell his daughter that her father had found his place, really found it, in a way that would make their future secure. The bells continued their song as he waited for Lena to answer, their steady rhythm matching the grateful beating of his heart. The Sunday morning sun painted golden squares on the worn carpet of First Baptist Church. Marcus and Lena walked up the familiar steps, her small hand in his. She wore her favorite yellow dress, the one with tiny daisies along the hem, while Marcus had chosen his best navy suit, the one he usually saved for special occasions. "Daddy, you're walking too slow." Lena tugged at his hand, eager to get inside where the sound of the organ already filled the air. Marcus smiled, letting her pull him along. "Just taking it all in, sweetheart." As they entered through the heavy wooden doors, the usual pre-service buzz quieted for a moment. Then, like a wave, the whispers and greetings began. Mrs. Thompson, who'd taught Sunday school for 30 years, wrapped Marcus in a warm hug. "We're so proud of you, child," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Deacon Williams clasped his hand firmly. The Lord works in mysterious ways, brother, sometimes through mops and markers. His eyes twinkled with gentle humor. They made their way to their usual pew, 5th row from the front, right side. Pastor J.B. Carter caught Marcus's eye from the pulpit and gave him a knowing nod. The old Vietnam vet had been Marcus's rock through many storms, including the loss of Lena's mother. The church filled quickly, familiar faces turning to smile at them. Marcus felt Lena sit up straighter beside him, pride radiating from her small frame. She might not understand all the details of what had happened at Brightworks, but she knew her daddy had done something important. Sister Martha's fingers found the organ keys, and the congregation rose for the opening hymn. The choir, in their royal blue robes, filed in from the side door. Marcus recognized many faces: line workers from the plant, neighbors, friends who'd brought casseroles when his wife passed. The first hymn was "Great is Thy Faithfulness," a standard opener. But as the second verse began, Marcus noticed something different. The choir's harmonies shifted, and they wove his name into the familiar melody. Brother Marcus showed us wisdom, serving with a faithful heart. Lena squeezed his hand, her eyes wide with delight. Around them, voices swelled with joy and pride, lifting the improvised verses to the rafters. Mrs. Jenkins, the choir director, had always said music could speak what words couldn't reach. Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes. These were his people, not the board members in their mahogany room, but these folks who'd known him since he was a boy running through these same aisles. They'd watched him grow up, marry, lose his wife, raise Lena. They understood what it meant for a black man with a mop to be recognized for his mind. After the service, people lingered longer than usual. The fellowship hall buzzed with conversation over coffee and Sister Betty's famous pound cake. Little groups formed and reformed around Marcus, but he noticed they kept their distance just enough, respecting his quiet nature, not making too much fuss. "Your daddy would have been proud," Pastor J.B. said quietly, appearing at Marcus's elbow. "He always said you had a special way of seeing things." Marcus nodded, grateful for the mention of his father, who'd worked 30 years on the Brightworks line before him. "I just hope I'm teaching Lena right." "Look at her," Pastor J.B. gestured to where Lena sat with her Sunday school friends, explaining something with animated hands. "That child knows exactly who she is and whose she is. You're doing just fine." The afternoon sun was low when they finally headed home, their hearts full and spirits lifted. In their small kitchen, while Lena changed out of her church clothes, Marcus stood looking at their refrigerator. Photos, school artwork, and reminders covered its surface, their life in magnets and memories. He found a scrap of paper and a pen, writing in his neat engineer's hand. "We're going to be okay." The words felt right. Not too proud, not too humble, just true. He taped it carefully between Lena's latest math test and the church potluck reminder. Monday morning arrived with a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Marcus noticed it the moment he stepped through Brightworks' front doors. The usual morning greetings were replaced with darting glances and hushed conversations that died as he passed. At his rolling cart, which had become his mobile office over the past weeks, Tammy waited with an expression that made his stomach drop. She held her phone with trembling hands. "Marcus, you need to see this." Her voice was barely above a whisper. He took the phone, reading the headline that blazed across the screen: "Brightworks Miracle Solution, Stolen Valor." Below it, an anonymous source claimed Marcus had plagiarized his solution from a classified military maintenance protocol. The memo detailed supposed disciplinary issues from his Army days, painting a picture of a troubled soldier who had taken credit for others' work. Marcus's hands grew cold as he scrolled. The accusations were specific enough to sound credible to outsiders, yet vague enough to be nearly impossible to disprove quickly. His mind raced through his service years, trying to understand how anyone could twist his innovations under fire into something so ugly. "There's more," Tommy said softly, taking back her phone to show him social media posts. Someone had posted photos of Lena's school, complete with her class schedule. The comments beneath made his heart race. Trolls speculating about his character, his intelligence, his right to be anywhere near the company's operations. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright. Marcus steadied himself against his cart, his fingers finding the familiar spine of his pocket notebook, where he kept his notes, prayers, and technical drawings. The same notebook he'd carried in the army, where he'd first sketched out the maintenance innovations that had saved lives. Footsteps approached rapidly, Evan Pierce's expensive shoes clicking against the tile floor. The COO's face was ashen, his typically immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. Behind him, 2 security guards stood awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. "Marcus, I need you to come with me." Evan's voice cracked slightly. "The board. We have to place you on administrative leave. Pending investigation. It's just procedure, you understand. We have to take these allegations seriously." Marcus felt dozens of eyes on him from around the factory floor. Workers pretended to be busy but watched the scene unfold. Some looked angry, others confused. A few seemed almost satisfied, as if this confirmed their worst assumptions about him. "My badge?" Marcus asked quietly, already reaching for it. Evan nodded, relief flooding his face at Marcus's calm compliance. "Yes, please, and we'll need you to leave the premises immediately. Security will escort you to your car." Tammy stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. You know Marcus didn't steal anything. The whole plant saw him solve it right here." "Ms. Brooks," Evan said stiffly, "this is a confidential personnel matter. Please return to your station. F. When evolution, Evan said stiffly. Marcus placed a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. "It's okay," he said, though it wasn't. "Truth has a way of coming out." He handed over his badge, the plastic warm from being pressed against his chest. With deliberate movements, he packed his notebook and personal items into his lunch bag. The security guards flanked him, an unnecessary show of force that made his ears burn with humiliation. As they walked through the plant, Marcus held his head high, even as whispers followed him like shadows. He thought of Lena's note. "Be brave. I like brave." His daughter's school day was just starting. Would she face questions? Stares? The thought made his hands shake. The morning sun was harsh in the parking lot. His old Civic sat alone in the row, somehow looking smaller than usual. The security guards stopped at the door, their discomfort obvious. Marcus climbed into the driver's seat, set his lunch bag on the passenger side where Lena usually left her backpack when he drove her to school. The engine started with its familiar rattle, but he didn't put it in gear right away. Instead, he gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles ached, watching the factory through the windshield, the place where, just yesterday, he'd felt like he finally belonged. The silence in the car pressed against his ears like cotton. His phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket, but he couldn't bring himself to look at it. Not yet. Right now, he just needed to breathe, to think, to pray. But the words wouldn't come. His hands tightened further on the wheel, the vinyl creaking under his grip. The pain in his knuckles grew sharper, grounding him in the moment. Through the windshield, he watched workers hurrying into the building, their faces turned away from his car, as if his situation might be contagious. Marcus pulled into his driveway, his thoughts as heavy as storm clouds. The house looked different somehow, smaller, more vulnerable. Through the kitchen window, he could see Lena doing her homework at the table, just like any other Monday afternoon. But this wasn't like any other Monday. He sat in the car for a long moment, gathering strength. His hands still trembled slightly as he lifted them from the steering wheel. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed his lunch bag, habit more than necessity, and headed inside. "Dad!" Lena looked up from her math worksheet, her smile fading as she caught his expression. "You're home early." "Yeah, sweetie." Marcus set his lunch bag down carefully, trying to keep his movements normal, controlled. "Had some things come up at work." Lena watched him with those observant eyes that missed nothing. She was too smart, too attuned to his moods. Is it because of those mean things people are saying online? Marcus's heart clenched. Of course she knew. Kids at school must have already been talking. He pulled out the chair next to her and sat down, close enough that their shoulders touched. Some people are spreading lies about me, he said quietly. And about you too. I'm so sorry about that, baby. Lena's lower lip trembled slightly. Did I do something wrong? Was it because I came to the factory on Saturday? No, absolutely not. Marcus wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. You didn't do anything wrong at all. Sometimes people get scared when things change. And instead of being brave about it, they try to make other people scared too. But why? Her voice was small, confused. You help them. You fix their problem. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, searching for the right words. Sometimes helping isn't enough. Sometimes people have ideas in their heads about who should be allowed to help, or who should get credit for helping. A knock at the door interrupted them. Through the window, Marcus saw Pastor J.B. Carter's familiar silhouette on the porch. The old minister's slight limp was more pronounced today, his cane tapping quietly against the welcome mat. Come on in, Pastor, Marcus called out, rising to unlock the door. Pastor J.B. entered slowly, his weathered face creased with concern. Heard what happened down at the plant. He nodded to Lena. Miss Lena, would you mind if I borrowed your daddy for a few minutes? I should finish my homework anyway, Lena said, gathering her papers. She hugged Marcus tight before heading to her room, leaving behind the scent of strawberry shampoo and grape juice. The two men settled at the kitchen table, where Marcus's coffee from that morning still sat, gone cold and forgotten. Pastor J.B. studied him with kind eyes that had seen too many good people weather storms they didn't deserve. You're thinking about fighting back, the pastor said. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded slowly. Got to protect my daughter. Can't let them spread lies about me, about my service. His voice grew tight. They're posting pictures of her school, Pastor. Her schedule. Pastor J.B. tapped his cane thoughtfully against the linoleum floor. The truth doesn't need to shout to win, Marcus. It just needs to stand. But if I don't defend myself, didn't say don't defend yourself, the pastor interrupted gently. Said the truth doesn't need to shout. There's a difference between standing firm and striking back. One builds, the other breaks. Marcus rubbed his face with his hands, feeling the weight of the day in every muscle. I don't know what to do. If I stay quiet, they'll say I'm guilty. If I fight back, they'll say I'm angry, dangerous, everything they already think I am. What does that notebook of yours say? Pastor J.B. gestured to the familiar pocket notebook peeking out of Marcus's shirt pocket. About that maintenance protocol they're claiming you stole? Got every sketch, every calculation dated and signed by my commanding officer. Marcus pulled out the notebook, its pages worn soft with use. Was trying to save lives, not win awards. Never thought I'd need to prove it was mine. Truth leaves tracks, Pastor J.B. said softly. Lies just leave noise. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. From down the hall came the soft sounds of Lena humming to herself as she worked on her homework, the same gospel tune Marcus often sang during his night shifts. I feel torn, Marcus admitted finally. Part of me wants to stand up, show everyone the proof, make them take back every word. But another part, he trailed off, looking toward Lena's room. Another part just wants to protect your girl, Pastor J.B. finished. Wants to keep her far from all this ugly business. Yeah. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. Sometimes the bravest thing a father can do is stand still in the storm, the pastor said, rising slowly to his feet. Not because he's afraid to move, but because he knows his children are watching how he weathers it. After Pastor J.B. left, Marcus sat alone in the darkening kitchen. He pulled out his phone, finding the photo that had started it all, the whiteboard with his 3 simple strokes that had solved the crisis. In the dim light, the markers looked like shadows, but the solution was still clear, still elegant in its simplicity. His finger hovered over the image as night settled around him. Somewhere in the quiet house, Lena had fallen asleep, trusting that her father would make things right. The truth didn't need to shout, he reminded himself. It just needed to stand. The end. The fluorescent lights cast long shadows across Brightworks' empty production floor. At 2 a.m., the usual symphony of whirring machines and bustling workers had been replaced by an almost sacred silence. Marcus's footsteps echoed softly as he walked past the idle assembly lines, his hand trailing along the cool metal railings. He hadn't planned to come here. Sleep had proven impossible, his mind racing with the day's events, replaying every moment like a movie he couldn't pause. The photos of Lena's school, the whispers, the sick feeling in his stomach when Evan had handed him the administrative leave paperwork. The whiteboard still stood in the engineering lab, his solution preserved under a layer of clear protective film. Marcus studied the 3 simple strokes he'd drawn that night, remembering how natural it had felt, how clear the answer had been. Now everything felt clouded, uncertain. "Thought I might find you here." Marcus turned to see Tammy Brooks standing in the doorway, a thick manila folder tucked under her arm. Her usual playful smile was replaced by something more determined. "Tommy, what are you doing here?" Security called when your badge registered at the gate. She stepped into the lab, setting the folder on the counter. "I was already awake, going through some interesting files." "Files?" Tammy nodded, opening the folder. "You remember how everything's recorded here? Badge swipes, computer logins, printer logs?" She spread out several papers covered in timestamps and user IDs. "Well, I got curious about that anonymous memo." Marcus moved closer, studying the documents. His years of military training had taught him to look for patterns, and these pages were telling a story. "See this?" Tommy pointed to a highlighted line. "This is a print log from the executive floor, specifically from Amanda Chen's computer, Cynthia Harrow's personal aide. Timestamp matches exactly 1 hour before that memo hit the press." Marcus's breath caught. "You're sure?" "That's not all." Tammy flipped to another page. "Network logs show she accessed your personnel file that same morning, and..." She pulled out her phone, showing him an email. "Ruth just forwarded this to me. The photos of Lena's school, they were taken from Cynthia's car. Security cameras don't lie." The weight that had been crushing Marcus's chest began to lift slightly. Evidence, proof, something solid to stand on. The lab door opened again, and Ruth stepped in, followed by 2 men Marcus didn't recognize. One wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase. The other was older, with military bearing and a chest full of ribbons visible under his open jacket. "Marcus," Ruth said warmly, though her eyes were serious, "I'd like you to meet James Warner, our outside ethics counsel, and Colonel David Richardson, U.S. Army, retired." Marcus straightened instinctively at the sight of the colonel's insignia. "Sir." Colonel Richardson stepped forward, extending his hand. "Sergeant Ellison, been a while since Kandahar." Marcus's eyes widened in recognition. "Colonel Richardson? From the 10th Mountain Division?" "The same." The colonel's grip was firm, familiar. "I hear someone's questioning your integrity regarding that torque calibration method you developed in the field. You remember that?" "Remember it?" The colonel laughed. "Son, that method saved an entire convoy of equipment. We implemented it across 3 forward operating bases. It's in the official field manual now, with your name on it." The ethics counsel, Warner, opened his briefcase and removed several documents. "We have the original commendation here, plus the patent application filed by the Army on your behalf. Your innovation quite literally wrote the book on rapid field calibration under extreme conditions." Marcus took the papers with slightly trembling hands, seeing his own name printed clearly at the top of each page. Tammy squeezed his arm gently. "There's more," Ruth said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had built Brightworks from the ground up. "The ethics investigation has already uncovered evidence of systematic attempts to discredit you. Miss Harrow's aide has admitted to acting under direct orders. Marcus looked at the small group gathered around him. Ruth's unwavering support, Tammy's fierce loyalty, the Colonel's steady presence, even Warner's professional determination to uncover the truth. In the quiet of the pre-dawn factory, something shifted. The tide was turning. Colonel Richardson stepped closer, his voice low and certain. "You did good work in Kandahar, Sergeant. You're doing good work here too. Don't let anyone tell you different." Marcus gripped the Colonel's hand again, feeling the strength of vindication beginning to replace the ache of doubt. The empty factory floor seemed to hum with possibility, as if the machines themselves were waiting to roar back to life, to prove once again that truth had a power all its own. The morning sun filtered through the wooden blinds of Ruth's office, casting warm stripes across decades of black and white photographs lining the walls. Marcus sat straight-backed in a leather chair, his weathered notebook resting on his knee, while Colonel James Harrison, silver-haired and decorated, spread documents across Ruth's broad mahogany desk. "Here's the original field report," the Colonel said, tapping a paper bearing official Army letterhead, March 15, 2008. "Sergeant Marcus Ellison's quick-thinking modification to our vehicle maintenance protocol saved not just the convoy, but revolutionized our entire approach to desert operations." Ruth leaned forward, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she studied the document. "And this was his original design?" "Every bit of it." The Colonel's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "I was there. Our equipment was failing left and right due to sand infiltration. Standard procedures weren't cutting it. Marcus here figured out the micro-calibration sequence that kept our vehicles running when nothing else would." Marcus watched silently as Ruth examined page after page of official documentation. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he remembered those desperate days in the desert. The heat, the pressure, the lives, depending on getting it right. "The Army actually commended you for this innovation," Ruth said, holding up a certificate with gold embossing. "Distinguished Service Achievement in Technical Excellence." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied softly. "Though, back then, we were just trying to stay alive." The Colonel nodded gravely. "That method saved dozens of lives, maybe hundreds. It became standard protocol across 3 battalions. And here's the kicker." He pulled out another document, this one newer. "The Army's still using a version of it today." Tammy, who had been quietly taking notes in the corner, spoke up. "So, not only did Marcus not plagiarize anything, he invented it," Ruth finished, a fierce pride in her voice. "Under fire, no less." Marcus cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I appreciate all this, but nothing," Ruth cut in, standing up. She walked to her photo wall, gesturing to the faces of workers through the years. "This company was built by people who solved problems because they had to, not because they had fancy titles, people who saw what needed doing and did it." She turned back to face him. "Just like you did in that desert, just like you did with our torque issue." The Colonel gathered his documents, arranging them carefully in his briefcase. "I've already submitted notarized copies to your Ethics Council. I'm also prepared to testify to the board personally if needed." Ruth's smile had a hint of steel in it. "Oh, you'll testify, Colonel. I want every board member to hear exactly how the method they accused Marcus of stealing came to be." Tammy stood, her notebook filled with fresh notes. "I've got the security log showing the leak came from Cynthia's office, plus timestamps of when the photos of Lena's school were accessed. It's all documented." Marcus felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. For the first time since the accusations had surfaced, he took a full, deep breath. The weight of suspicion that had been crushing him started to lift. Ruth must have noticed the change in his posture. She walked over and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You've been carrying this alone for too long, Marcus. Let us help you set the record straight." The Colonel extended his hand to Marcus. "Sergeant Ellison, it's been an honor to serve with you again, even if just for this mission." Marcus stood and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Colonel, for everything." "The board meets at 9 tomorrow morning," Ruth said, gathering the documents into a thick folder. She squared the edges with practiced precision. "We'll present everything: the Army commendations, the security logs, the timeline of events. No detail left unclear." "And then?" Marcus asked quietly. Ruth's eyes sparked with determination. "And then we make this right. Every bit of it." She walked to her desk and pressed a button on her phone. "Nancy, please call the board secretary. Tomorrow's meeting needs to be recorded. And get me Kevin from Legali. Want him to review everything tonight." Marcus watched as Ruth moved with renewed purpose, her earlier weariness replaced by the energy of someone preparing for battle. She looked up at him, her expression softening. "Go home, Marcus. Hug your daughter. Tomorrow, we set this right." The Brightworks boardroom hummed with tension. Morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating the faces of board members, executives, and plant workers who packed the elegant space. Marcus sat in the back row, his worn notebook in his lap, while Tommy squeezed his shoulder in silent support. Ruth Delgado stood at the head of the long table, her silver hair catching the sunlight, her presence commanding attention. To her right sat Colonel Harrison in his formal uniform, medals glinting. To her left, a stack of documents waited. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Ruth began, her voice steady and clear, "we're here to address serious allegations made against Marcus Ellison, but what we've uncovered goes far beyond clearing his name." She lifted the first document. "This is the original Army field report from March 2008, detailing the creation of what we now call the Ellison calibration method." She passed copies down the table. "Note the official seals, the commanding officer's signature, and most importantly, the date." Board members leaned forward, studying the papers. Cynthia Harrow sat rigid in her chair, her pearl necklace twisted tight between her fingers. "Ms. Brooks," Ruth called, "please share what you discovered in the security logs." Tommy stood, smoothing her work shirt. "Last Monday at 11:42 p.m., someone using Ms. Harrow's executive access code sent the anonymous memo from a computer in the administrative wing. Our cameras show her aide, Thomas Wheeler, at that workstation at the exact time." A murmur rippled through the room. Cynthia's face tightened. "Furthermore," Tammy continued, "the photos of Mr. Ellison's daughter's school were taken from a company car assigned to Mr. Wheeler. We have the GPS logs." "This is circumstantial," Cynthia cut in, her voice sharp, "and hardly relevant to the larger issue of reputational risk." "Colonel Harrison," Ruth interrupted smoothly, "please tell us about Sergeant Ellison's service record." The colonel rose, ramrod straight. "In March 2008, our convoy maintenance systems were failing due to extreme desert conditions. Standard protocols weren't working. Sergeant Ellison developed an innovative calibration sequence that saved not just our immediate convoy, but became standard practice across 3 battalions. He pulled out a gold-sealed certificate. The Army awarded him the Distinguished Service Achievement in Technical Excellence. This method wasn't stolen, it was invented by Marcus Ellison under enemy fire, and it saved American lives." Marcus kept his eyes forward, his expression calm despite the emotion tightening his throat. He could feel the shift in the room, see the dawning realization on faces as the truth settled in. "The Army," the colonel continued, "still uses a version of his method today. It's now part of our standard vehicle maintenance protocol in desert operations." Evan Pierce, who had been unusually quiet, cleared his throat. I need to say something." He stood, turning to face Marcus. "I made a terrible mistake. When the allegations came in, I rushed to protect the company's image without investigating the truth. I put public relations above human dignity." His voice cracked slightly. "Mr. Ellison, I am deeply sorry." The silence in the room was profound. Cynthia tried one last time. "While this is all very touching, we need to consider the shareholders." "I am considering them," Ruth cut in. "I move for an immediate vote to remove board member Cynthia Harrow for cause, specifically the orchestration of a malicious defamation campaign against a valued employee." The board secretary quickly distributed ballot cards. The scratching of pens filled the tense silence. When the votes were counted, the result was clear, 12-1. "Miss Harrow," Ruth said quietly, "please leave the premises. Security will escort you to collect your personal items." As Cynthia swept out, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, Ruth turned to address the entire room. "Now, I have two announcements. First, I am appointing Marcus Ellison as our new Director of Process Integrity, effective immediately." Applause erupted, led by the workers along the walls. Marcus bowed his head briefly, overwhelmed by the moment. "Second," Ruth continued, a smile warming her face, "we are launching the Brightworks Fellowship Program. This paid apprenticeship initiative will focus on veterans, single parents, and returning citizens who want to build careers in manufacturing. Mr. Ellison will help design the program, ensuring we tap into talent that others might overlook." She turned to Marcus, "Because sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places, and everyone deserves a chance to prove their worth." The room burst into applause again, louder this time. Tammy wiped tears from her eyes. The colonel beamed, and Marcus sat quietly, his notebook open to a blank page, ready to begin the next chapter. The Brightworks cafeteria buzzed with life and laughter. Streamers in company colors hung from the ceiling, and the aroma of barbecue and fresh-baked cookies filled the air. Workers from every shift mingled together, their usual work clothes replaced with casual wear and bright smiles. A local jazz band, set up in the corner, played smooth, uplifting tunes that floated above the happy chatter. Marcus stood near the punch bowl, watching the scene with quiet joy. He'd traded his janitor's uniform for a simple blue dress shirt and khakis, but his familiar, gentle presence remained unchanged. Tommy appeared at his side, balancing two plates piled high with food. "You better eat something," she said, nudging him with her elbow. "Can't have our new Director of Process Integrity running on empty." He accepted the plate with a grateful nod. "Still feels strange, hearing that title." "Well, get used to it," she grinned, popping a piece of cornbread into her mouth. Across the room, Ruth chatted with a group of veterans, the first applicants for the Brightworks Fellowship Program. Their eyes shone with hope and determination as she explained the details of the apprenticeship opportunity. Marcus recognized that look. He'd worn it himself not so long ago. The music softened as Pastor J.B. Carter made his way to the small podium at the front of the room. His weathered face crinkled with warmth as he adjusted the microphone. The crowd gradually quieted, turning to face him. "Folks," he began, his rich voice carrying easily through the space, "I've been asked to say a few words of blessing over this new chapter in Brightworks' story." He paused, his eyes finding Marcus in the crowd. "But first, I want us to remember something important. Healing isn't just for some of us, it's for all of us." The room grew still, listening intently. "Let us pray," Pastor J.B. continued, bowing his head. "Lord, we thank you for this day of celebration. We thank you for Marcus Ellison, whose gifts you've used to bless this company and this community. We thank you for Ruth Delgado's wisdom and courage to recognize truth when she saw it." He took a deep breath. "And Lord, we pray for those who let fear guide their actions. Help us all remember that every person carries worth in your eyes. Bless this fellowship program, that it might open doors for others who need a second chance, just as you're always ready to give us second chances." "Amen," the crowd responded softly. Marcus felt a small hand slip into his. Lena had appeared beside him, wearing her favorite yellow dress, her eyes bright with pride. Near the entrance, a fresh group of faces gathered, the first cohort of fellowship participants. 10 men and women, some in veterans' caps, others carrying the determined look of single parents ready for a new start. They would begin training next week, learning both technical skills and the wisdom of experienced workers like Tammy. Ruth approached the podium next, carrying a wooden plaque. "This will hang beside that famous whiteboard," she announced with a smile. "It reads, 'Excellence has many uniforms.' Let it remind us that wisdom can come from unexpected places." The crowd applauded, and Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. He looked down at his daughter, who beamed up at him. Later, as people began helping with cleanup, Marcus made his way to the night shift janitorial crew gathering for their regular start time. Jim, the crew lead, started to offer congratulations, but Marcus cut him off with a wave. "First thing you should know," Marcus said, "is that you're all part of my team now. Process integrity includes keeping this place running smooth and clean, just like always. We're family here." The relief and joy on their faces made his heart swell. These were his people, had been from the start, and he wouldn't leave them behind. As the celebration wound down, Marcus found himself in a quiet corner with Ruth and Pastor J.B. The older man clasped his shoulder warmly. "You did good, son," Pastor J.B. said. "Stayed true to yourself through it all." Ruth nodded in agreement. "The fellowship program is already getting attention from other companies. You've started something bigger than Brightworks, Marcus." "Just trying to keep the doors open for others," Marcus replied softly. "Like you did for me." The drive home that evening felt different somehow. The same streets, the same turns, but everything tinged with new possibility. Marcus and Lena stopped for ice cream, a special treat to mark the occasion. At home, they settled onto their worn but comfortable couch, Lena curling up against his side like she used to do when she was smaller. The house felt peaceful, wrapped in the gentle quiet of a dream finally realized. Marcus looked down at his daughter, this precious girl who had been his anchor through everything. She gazed back at him with those wise eyes that seemed to see right through to his heart. "We made it, baby girl," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We really made it." What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Marcus Ellison, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.